back. We're live. We're here on Think Tech having a wonderful Monday. Right, Jenna?
Yep.
Yeah. She's so nice. That's Jenna Long. She is the supply chain manager of Pacific Biodiesel. There's only one like her.
That's true.
Oh, true. Okay. And she is the daughter of Bob and Kelly King. And I have known her for a while. I'm trying to place it. So it was back when, the Hawaii Science and Technology Council. I think I met you there at a meeting. Yeah. Lisa Gibson was organizing a meeting at the Pacific Club, and there you were, and I met you. And you're not much older now.
I wish.
Anyway, today is Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, here on a Monday at 3 o'clock. And we're talking about fossil-free transportation. How are we doing? Okay, and the key to that is, Pacific Biodiesel does biofuel. And so the inherent question in the way I pose it is, how does biofuel relate to fossil-free transportation? Okay, so we're going to study that today with you.
All right.
Because you know about that. After all, you're the supply chain manager.
Yes.
So what is it like being a supply chain manager?
It's actually very hectic and interesting. I've helped bring in all of our raw feedstock to the plant and move all our finished product out, and we are making over 200,000 gallons of biodiesel a month right now, so there's a lot to move.
Put that in perspective for me. How many gallons of, say, gasoline is the state using? Any idea?
I'm not sure on the gasoline, but for diesel fuel, the Big Island itself uses about 11 million gallons of diesel fuel a year for just on-road transportation. So that doesn't include any of the power plants or off-road use.
Okay, and you're making?
We're making about 200,000 gallons
So
a
that's
month.
a substantial dent in it, at least on the Big Island.
Yeah. At our full capacity, we could provide enough for about 50% of the on-road diesel that's used on the Big Island right
Okay,
now.
so let me start getting this straight. The outlines of our discussions are beginning to reveal themselves. So on the Big Island anyway, how much was the total of diesel used?
About 11 million
11
gallons,
million, so okay,
roughly.
200,000. So that's, what is that, 2%? I get that right? 11,
So we can make about 5 million gallons a
but
year.
you could
at
make
full
5
production.
million, and
Yeah.
that's about half, or a
Yeah.
little less than half.
Right.
Okay, and you make it with agricultural material.
Actually, primarily we use waste materials.
Okay, restaurant
Yeah,
waste.
we're slowly moving towards agricultural materials as we can, but it's still a very limited portion of what we're doing right now.
Okay.
Mostly it's restaurant waste and recently even rendering plant waste products from the West
The
Coast.
slaughterhouse
just to help,
kind,
Yeah,
yeah.
just to help fill in because there's only so much cooking oil that we can
Yeah, so you have to
produce.
find new sources, yeah.
Right, right.
So the first source is restaurant. That's your
Right.
traditional
That's our
historical
favorite
source.
source, yeah.
And you
favorite
got the
thing.
technology to do the good
Yeah.
job on that, easy, efficient, all that. So that's number one, but then you run out of that and you go to rendering waste, but that's from the mainland. You have to ship it
Right.
in because we don't really have a rendering.
Right.
We don't have a rendering
We
plant.
don't yet. There are plans in the works. There's actually construction happening on one on the Big Island right now.
Where?
It's going to be in Pauwilo.
Oh, good.
So north of Hilo.
Is that servicing the Parker Ranch or what?
It will service Hawaii beef producers, which has a slaughterhouse in that area, and they're hoping maybe the rest of the island as well.
Okay, so you capture, really, you're the only one and you'll capture it all, right? They'll be
We're
happy
hoping.
to sell you their
We're- yeah,
rendering.
we're
Because otherwise
probably
they'd have to throw it away, yeah.
either that or there's some other minor uses for it, but I think we're hoping biodiesel will be the main use for that oil.
Okay, so those are the, oh, and then after that, there's plants.
After that, there's agricultural.
Jatropha, for
Right.
example.
So Jatropha is one, and we have some of that planted, and we're doing some testing on that.
That's not
Actually,
moving as fast as you want it to move, though.
It's not. Yeah, it's a tricky plant. One of the biggest challenges to Jatropha is that the byproduct meal out of it is toxic, so you can't feed it to animals as you
Oh,
would
too
want
bad.
to.
So you'd want to have
you
both
have
of
to have
those
another,
possibilities.
Right, you have to have another product to make out of that byproduct.
Who are the candidates? I mean, other products.
I think right now most of it's going to a compost or maybe even a biochar type material.
But if you
they're
wanted to find
still-
another plant, what would you use?
Oh, actually, we're looking at some right now, but we have a crushing mill facility on the Big Island that is actually their favorite feedstock right now is macadamia nuts. So they're
That's a
taking
different thing
macadamia
altogether.
nuts, crushing it, and they get the mac nuts from the factories, so they're basically the waste nuts. So this is an agricultural waste product being crushed. The oil can be used for biodiesel. We're actually using a little bit for soap as well right now. And then the meal part of it is actually good cattle feed. So
Okay. What was AKP supposed to, Ionico Opono, they were supposed to be doing agricultural biofuel. What was their stock?
I haven't found out what their actual plant that they were going to use. I think it was asked of them at one of the meetings, but was not revealed, at least at any
really?
meetings that I
Okay.
was at.
So we don't really know.
I'm not exactly sure what
Yeah.
plant material they were going to use,
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
had a different process that they were planning
Yeah.
to put it under. So they weren't going to start with an oil crop, which is the thing that we start with. Our crops have to inherently have an oil in them, and then we basically are just pressing it out and releasing the oil. We're not creating the energy in the plant.
Right. Okay. So is there anybody else doing this in Hawaii?
As far as we know, nobody's commercially making biofuels at this scale.
And your refineries, can I use that word?
Yeah.
Your refineries, you have one on Maui, the original, I guess,
That was our oldest one.
your oldest one. And you have one on the Big Island, that was your big and high-tech one.
Right. This is our Big Island is the newest and the greatest capacity. We have one on Oahu, which is currently not producing biodiesel. They are still collecting oils. They're consolidating it. They're doing a pre-processing on it and then sending it to us on the Big Island to make biodiesel. And then our Maui facility was actually dismantled.
I remember
recently.
reading that, yeah. So you're not using that anymore, it's
So,
finished.
yeah, we're not using the facility. We are still using the site just to collect oils, consolidate them, and again ship them
You can move them
to
around.
the Big Island.
Yeah. And as the supply chain manager, you would know what moves
Yeah.
where.
I get to move all of that.
So
Back and
why did you close the one in Maui? I mean, was it the technology was old or what?
The technology was old, so we actually stopped making biodiesel there last year. The thing about our Big Island plant is it's much more efficient, and so it uses fewer chemicals in the process, but also the fuel quality is much better. So once we started making the fuel on the Big Island, we felt like it was an upgrade in fuel for our customers, and not a lot of people wanted to go back.
Yeah.
So we now do all of our production out of the Big Island. So that was one reason that we stopped making biodiesel there, but we did have to take all of our storage tanks out, partially due
In
to
Maui.
permitting issues.
Yeah,
on
yeah,
Maui.
yeah. Okay, so I guess at least for the foreseeable future, you're going to do your heavy lifting, or at least your commercial lifting
Right.
in the Big Island.
Right.
Where is it in the Big Island? In the
It's,
Hamakua also?
It's actually south of Hilo, about 8 miles south in KL, yeah.
Near Shipman.
near It's actually in Shipman Business
Shipman.
Park, yeah,
Oh,
in the
okay.
industrial park there.
Oh, great. Perfect location
Yeah,
for it,
it's
actually.
a good
Yeah.
location for a smelly
good.
company.
So, now in terms of the diesel, I mean, what interests me about what you described is that theoretically you're not far away from replacing diesel fuel, at least on the Big Island. And if 11 million gallons are used, then you're, creating half as much. That's nearly 50% of all the diesel fuel, and it's a perfect substitution. Am I right? You don't have to adapt your vehicle.
Correct.
You just pour in the biofuel and it works just like fossil diesel
Correct.
works.
Yeah, we have all kinds of models of trucks and cars and boats and equipment. It has to be diesel, but if it runs on diesel fuel, most likely it'll run on biodiesel. There's very few exceptions.
Yeah.
that-
So
to
that's really important. So then you could really, I mean, right now you're making a significant niche, but you could do a huge niche if you could ramp up, the production.
That's one of the exciting things about biodiesel is how easy it is to use, and the fact that you can switch to completely using biodiesel in your car
Without
so
damaging your car or
right.
anything.
And
Yeah.
so that was one of the exciting things for us is the fact that you can blend it if you want, but you don't have to. So we can actually go petroleum free in our vehicles right away, right off the factory floor.
Diesel.
Yeah, diesel vehicles.
You know, and the question then is how many? Let's just take the Big Island as a kind of microcosm here. Um, how much of the how many? What's the percentage of diesel cars to all the cars? You got an idea?
I don't have any info on that. It's obviously smaller. The
smaller,
diesel cars
but-
are a fraction of the gasoline
Yeah.
cars on the passenger side. On the heavy-duty transportation
It's a bigger
area,
percentage.
there are mostly diesel. So that's
They're
really
mostly diesel.
Mostly diesel,
Okay.
yeah. Once you get to the semi-truck arena, they're all diesel.
Okay.
So that's where we've been really focusing, where we can make an impact on transportation is in the heavy-duty, larger vehicles that need the power of the diesel fuel.
Okay. Well, this is
And-
getting
yeah.
interesting now.
And in that area, there's actually very few alternatives for them as well. So, when you look at batteries and electric vehicles, when you get to the higher heavy
Can't get an
duty,
electric truck so easily.
Yeah, it's a little trickier to have a full electric
Yeah.
semi-truck.
Now, what about the other islands? I mean, is there a market, say, in Kauai? And I suppose there must be a residual market in Maui anyway.
Right.
And in Oahu, yes.
Yeah, Big Island actually uses the most diesel fuel for trucking because the island's so large and
Yeah.
everything moves back and forth across the island.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of trucking going on all the islands. So there's
So
there's a
all
good
of those are
market.
potential buyers for.
Yeah.
Are they buying now? I mean, you have supply chain connections on all the neighbor islands?
Almost all the islands are distributing biodiesel. We don't have very much distribution on Kauai. That's our last area to look at. Right now, we're selling to private individuals on Kauai, but there's no real commercial biodiesel.
How about
available.
Oahu?
Oahu, there's plenty of fuel available. We actually distribute it through Aloha Petroleum and Midpack Petroleum. So it's
Cool, good for them.
Yeah, that's great. They've stepped up and realized that this is a fuel just like the diesel fuel that they distribute, and they can easily move that around, move our biodiesel as well. So.
You know, Jenna, this makes me think that if I'm really committed, to fossil-free transportation, then one surefire way of doing that is to buy a diesel car. Now there was a time back in the 70s and the 80s where there's a lot of diesel cars. Everybody thought they were really terrific. I don't know if that's still the time. I don't think I know anybody who actually drives a diesel car. Are there diesel cars around these days?
There are. There are fewer than there were, and most of them are not American, as what they were back in the 60s and 70s. But Volkswagen's got some, BMW, Mercedes. There's a lot of the European brands are bringing diesel cars to America, and there's new ones coming out as well. GM just came out with a diesel version of the Chevrolet Cruze, so there's more passenger cars being available now. It's still a small fraction of the models that are available in gasoline.
Yeah, sure.
But when you go to other places in the world, you see there's Nissan Civics and other cars are made in diesel
Yeah.
in Asia.
In
and
Europe,
other
in
places.
Asia,
In
yeah, a lot
Europe,
of diesel
yeah.
cars, yeah.
They just don't bring them to America.
Yeah. Now, are they making them? You say there's a sort of a new, God, forgive me for this, a new energy in maybe Detroit making some diesel cars. But are they doing this, for the possibility of biodiesel, or are they just doing it for old times' sake?
Not so much for biodiesel. Actually, most of them don't focus on the fact that you can put biodiesel in there. Although Chevrolet Cruze did come out and say you can put a 20% biodiesel blend in this new Cruze. But most of them are actually focusing on the fuel efficiency side of it. So they're saying buy a diesel car because you'll get 30% better miles per gallon, and that way you'll cut your fossil, your carbon footprint. So it does have that
So it's
benefit
efficiency
as well.
more than the
Right.
origin of the fuel.
And with the higher gas prices and fuel prices in general, they're seeing that maybe there's more demand for more fuel efficient cars.
Yeah.
But yeah, they haven't really jumped on board with promoting the biodiesel use in their cars yet.
But theoretically, you could, if you take a diesel car you're getting the efficiency of a diesel car, which is going to be that way, even if you use, conventional diesel in
Right.
it. And B, you're getting the biodiesel benefit,
Right.
where you can say, you're not using any fossil fuels.
Right, right. And then the third point is the diesel cars actually last longer. So your car will actually will be a
Because the
greater
way the
investment.
engine is constructed
Right,
and all
they're
that.
pretty durable engines.
They more expensive?
They are more expensive
Yeah.
because of those three, because of two of those three factors.
Speaking of expense, what about the expense of biofuel? What about the expense of your biofuel? Are you competitive with conventional biofuel?
We're cost competitive with conventional diesel. We're kind of the only biofuel that's made for a diesel vehicle, so there's not very many other
Okay,
biofuels
so
to
does that
compete
mean
with.
it's the same price as conventional diesel?
Just about.
Really?
In some places we're actually cheaper, and it just depends on the price of diesel that week or that month.
Okay.
But most of the time, we're very competitive or cheaper.
Okay, well, that really sort of lays out the territory. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back. We're going to drill down exactly, the title question, I suppose, and that is fossil-free transportation in Hawaii. How do we get there? I know that's a big challenge, but we're going
Big
to
question.
wrap our arms around that. Okay, and that's Jenna Long. She is the supply chain manager of Pacific Biodiesel out of Maui or Oahu.
I am currently based in Hilo.
Okay, all right. You said that.
The other one.
Okay, and this is Hawaii, the state of clean energy, and here on Think Tech Talks, I'm Jay Fidel. We'll be back in a short while. We'll be right back. I'm Jay Fidel. Come and watch Agritech in Hawaii on Mondays from 4 to 5 p.m. We'll introduce you to farmers, agricultural officials, agricultural experts, and academicians. You'll learn about agriculture, which is very important in Hawaii. Come and watch us.
Aloha, my name is Willow Chang Alion, and I host a show called The Art of Life. We air live every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. And what we do is basically we focus on individuals who create a unique sense of place for Hawaii. These are movers and shakers, artists, innovators. They are also traditionalists. They're all involved in the archival process, and they make this place a unique place, one that makes Hawaii a richer place to be. I hope you do join us, and certainly tell your friends about the show, whether they live here or they live abroad. It's a way to give back to our community. We're keeping it Pono.
Hey, we're back. We're live. We're at Think Tech Talks here on a given Monday, 3 to 4, talking about Hawaii, the state of clean energy, with Jenna Long, who is the supply chain manager of Pacific Biodiesel out of, well, headquarters in Maui, but she works out of Hilo, and she spends a lot of time here in Oahu, too. Okay, and we're talking about fossil-free transportation in Hawaii. I mean, to go to that for a minute, it's the bugaboo, because we really haven't, in a larger sense, achieved much progress there. I mean, in fact, it's between you and electric cars. There are 1,800 electric cars in the state. It's not very much, not going nearly as fast as you might have hoped. And you have a lot more diesel vehicles, at least that are potentially customers for biofuel. So we have these two elements. There's a third element is hydrogen cars, which is kind of like an electric car. It uses a battery. And in that case, most of them are government and buses,
Right.
and there's not a lot of, I don't think there's any. If I wanted to go out and buy a hydrogen car today, good luck.
We'll be searching.
Yeah, it isn't around. So, so it seems to me that you are one of the promising possibilities in moving us there. I mean, we're never going to be able to do aviation fuel because that's just too complex for us, for the state of Hawaii. And we talked about algae for a while about that. And we had a facility going on in Kauai, but the next time you look, no facility, no algae, and no aviation, no biofuel aviation. So the question is really cars and trucks on the highways. That's transportation. And people talk about getting very efficient and having carpooling and car sharing. They talk about, have you heard of Uber? which
have
is
not.
where you can dial a cab,
Oh, okay.
which could be a cab or maybe not a cab, who will come to you in a matter of seconds or minutes and take you where you want to go, and that puts fewer cars on the highway, on the street. So that's one way of doing it. But I think ultimately the way people see it, it's the way the car, the vehicle, the truck works, and it's gas or it's electric or it's biofuel or last hydrogen. So how is this going to proceed? Are you growing in your supply chain by leaps and bounds? Do you see some dramatic thing happening which tells you the direction of all of this?
We're growing slowly. It's been a long, slow growth for us as a company. Um, Even since building this new facility, which the new facility itself, with the capacity we have, is a pretty big leap for us. We went from about 1.5 million gallon capacity for the whole state between Oahu and Maui to this 5 million gallon a year capacity. So we increased our capacity quite a bit. It's still a very small portion of the state's fuel use. But our growth to get to that capacity has been a slow, challenging one.
Yeah.
It's not been easy by any means.
But theoretically, if you could get by, we'll talk about the challenges, but if you could get by whatever those challenges are, and if people, would take the plunge, I mean, if people with diesel vehicles would take the plunge, then we could have, a substantial number of vehicles running on biofuel.
Good.
And so that would be one element. I mean, everybody always says, "Oh, you can't have only one solution. You have to have many solutions. You have to see how that all works out and so forth." And I think we all have to agree with that because it's too early in the game for us to know what is the magic solution or whether there should be only one solution.
And the nice thing about biodiesel is it's got its niche areas, heavy duty trucking, or even generators or boats can use it, but it can be blended in with other renewable energies such as solar and wind. We're not expecting to replace all of the electrical
no,
power or any of those other things.
The thing about biofuel, though, is it runs 24/7.
It does.
It's completely firm and dispatchable.
Right. And it's a nice backup to other technologies. So it's a nice backup to the solar or the wind. So HECO can use it in their generators to back up the other technologies rather than use it as a prime power.
I hate to tell you this, but they are using it, but it comes from somewhere else, right? Aren't they using a couple what do you call it, fast response, peaking plant out in Kapolei? They got a huge tank of biofuel out there, which they get on a boat from somewhere else.
They do. Actually, recently we've sent some of ours that direction as well. They are using some of our fuel in that power
good.
plant. And they're going back out periodically for new bids for that fuel. So
They have to compete.
so we have to compete with others, which is fair. And
Well, I don't know if
hopefully
it's
we'll-
fair. I mean, if you're doing it locally, don't you think you should have an advantage?
yeah, we would hope that they would.
I mean, if building a local industry,
Right.
that means something.
Yeah. And actually, Helco has been very supportive. Helco, and the whole group have been pretty supportive of our locally produced power. They've really stepped up and favored that kind of thing. We do have a contract to supply fuel to the emergency power plant here on Oahu, and one of, I think, the neatest things is they use our fuel in most of their fleets. So they actually use it as a transportation fuel as well on the Big Island, Oahu, and elsewhere.
So it's hard for you to go into high quantity production if you don't know that you can win the bid for a particular installation like the peaking plant. If you spend the money for all kinds of refinery equipment or whatever you need in order to deliver big volume to them, you can't be sure that you'll get the work, you get the transact. And if you can't be sure, that'd be bad, because then you will have spent money and you have no way of recapturing and so forth.
And that's why we like like this type of fuel because there are so many markets for it. We know that it can be used in trucks and boats and other things, so we don't have to rely on one market, such as the utility, to use all of our fuel.
Yeah.
For example, the bus system here on Oahu could actually use all of our production
Yes.
if they switched over to biodiesel.
Yes, and that would be
there's-
so easy.
Yeah, and it would be pretty easy for them.
Yeah.
So there's definitely other large volume markets out there, and some of them which might be a better use for our biodiesel in the long term, such as road transportation.
What's holding up the bus deal? Why, you know, I mean, for my money, you should have the buses, period.
Yeah, we're hoping that will transpire.
Okay,
They're,
I'm
they actually,
knocking wood.
Yeah, they actually did a demonstration project recently and ran their buses on the biodiesel blend, and it was successful. So we're hoping that soon they can get it into their main fuel stream.
Okay, well, then the other thing that comes to mind, only because you've mentioned it a couple of times, is boats. But I mean, boats include ships, doesn't it? I mean, we are an isolated, you know, archipelago, as they say, and we have to bring in so many things by boats, some of which we shouldn't bring in, but there you have it. And so these boats and ships all use diesel fuel. There was an attempt, I mean, I don't think it was all that serious attempt by, who was it? Young Brothers, to convert or use, at least for a test, biofuel maybe 10 years ago. I don't think that went anywhere. But theoretically, the biofuel that you guys make is worthy of marine engines, right? It's the same thing as the trucks, right?
Right. It can be used in marine engines that currently run on diesel fuel. Some of the boats that are currently moving inter-island or even to the mainland run on actually a different grade of diesel fuel. Ours is a little bit cleaner than that grade, so
Is that make it easier then?
should make it easier to.
So they could run the rough stuff, but they'll do better running your stuff.
Yeah,
Is that
their
what you're
emissions they could actually clean up their emissions a little bit by using this lower sulfur fuel.
saying? So why don't they all sign up?
That's the question.
You know, I mean, it seems to me as a matter of policy, Hawaii companies should support Hawaii renewable resources, and this is one of them. And we
Yeah.
could be flush with biofuel like the kind you make in all our marina operations. So.
Yeah, we hope that as people learn about it and understand the fact that it can run in the conventional diesel engine, that they do make that switch. Sometimes it's just that mechanics don't understand what it is or the fact that it can run without modification. A lot of people still think of biodiesel as filtered vegetable oil, so they think that you need to do modifications to your vehicle to run it. And so we actually do get quite a few people coming on board as soon as they learn that it's easy to use and it's price competitive. We have a lot of people that make that quick decision to switch over.
And it doesn't give your engine cavities.
It doesn't.
We'll take a short break here and come back and talk about the challenges. That's Jenna Long. She is the supply chain manager of Pacific Biodiesel. Sounds like a great job, actually. And we're talking today about fossil-free transportation in Hawaii and how we can get there here on Think Tech Talks, specifically on our show called Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. I'm Jay Fidel. I'll be right back, and then we get down to the challenges, and we'll meet them all, right?
We'll try.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Jenna Long, Pacific Biodiesel Supply Chain Manager, talking about fossil-free transportation in Hawaii. Really important. And it certainly appears from our discussion so far that biofuel could be a significant element, maybe a transformative element in our transportation, our ground transportation, also our ships, actually. So why isn't it? I'm asking you about the challenges you referred to earlier.
Well, some of the challenges are just the technology. It's the diesel engine technology has changed a little bit. Biodiesel actually has changed along with it, and it's become a lot better over the years. But there was a time back when biodiesel first started where it was a very crude process. Many people were doing it on their own, and there's actually a lot of memory of that time from mechanics and others who tried it back then and it didn't work so well. So the new fuel is actually much better. It meets a lot of new specifications that didn't even exist back then. So it's partly a perception issue. People perceive that it won't work because it was strained vegetable oil back, people were doing it that way. Now the fuel is actually processed much differently. We distill it at our Big Island plant, and so that takes out a lot of impurities, and even the color that was in there before. So I think we have to do a re-education, and that's what our company's been doing the last couple of years, is a re-education on this is what biodiesel is today. It's very compatible with diesel vehicles, and in fact, it's cost competitive as well. So partly that's been a challenge, just getting through that perception.
Yeah, okay. It reminds me of tilapia, because people remember tilapia as being a canal fish. And now Alan Wong makes, 4 different kinds of tilapias, all delicious.
Right.
And it's all clean and neat and beautiful.
Right.
And people still think it's a canal fish. Even though it's a delicacy around the world. A lot of local people will not touch tilapia. They got to get over that. It's the same thing. It's a question of perception.
Same thing.
Yeah.
And it's the same way to tackle is just to try it.
Right.
So once you try it, you know that it works, and that it's fine as a fuel.
So what about you talked about specifications. So somebody is setting standards here. Who is setting standards, and what are the standards, and how are you able to meet the standards?
There's actually an ASTM standard, which is ASTM is the group that creates standards for all kinds of materials. They have a standard for biodiesel fuel for the U.S., and that is reviewed regularly and updated regularly. This is a series of a dozen or 2 dozen specifications, things like how much water can be in it, how much sediment, how much glycerin, which is the soapy material that we pull out. Basically, it just points to make sure that the fuel is of a high quality. So all of our fuel meets that standard, and it has since we started producing fuel. The standard itself has changed, which has made the fuel better over the last decade.
So, I can have a fair degree of confidence that if I buy biofuel today in the state of Hawaii, which is mostly from you, I think, it is not going to gunk up my car. It's not going to have any negative effect on my car, my engine, and so forth. And it's going to act at least as good as conventional diesel.
Yeah, I can't speak for other people's biofuel.
Just yours.
But for our fuel, yeah, it all meets the national standard, and that means that it's going to be compatible with the diesel vehicle in most of the forms that it is today, as compatible as a diesel fuel would be, because diesel fuel has its own ASTM specification.
Okay. So now, conventional diesel has its own specification.
Right.
But that specification will be very similar to the biodiesel specification.
Slightly different, yeah, because of the slightly different characteristics of biodiesel.
Right, but when you talk about contaminants and
Right.
things that would do something to your engine, It's the same, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's, now, I guess the first question is how you make people understand that. You could, of course, come on Think Tech Hawaii, talk about it.
We could. And we do.
But, you know, this is an old story and it exists in many contexts in the state. How do you convince people who are steadfast in, you know, not knowing the deal and resisting? How do you change the way they think?
Well, we try to look at it from several different ways. You know, we talk a lot about the environmental benefits of biodiesel, and so that actually turns some people who might not otherwise look at it when you talk to them about the fact that, okay, if you spill this on the ground, it's going to biodegrade. If you spill it in the ocean, it's going to biodegrade. It's got other reasons to try it rather than just the fact that it runs the same as diesel. We also talk a lot about the fact that it's locally made, and when you buy the biodiesel, you're supporting your neighbor and your community. You're supporting jobs across the state, from the people who collect the oil to the people who make the biodiesel, and the people who distribute it.
And at some point in the future, a lot of agricultural labor will
Right.
be involved in this.
Right, and if we can get to that agricultural stage, that's actually multiples of jobs that would be going on in the agricultural field.
yeah.
For every gallon of fuel that we'd make, that's a lot of acres. You know, you'd have to harvest the acres, and a lot of jobs that would be.
I wanted to ask you about that because we follow diversified agriculture a lot. Big Island is a kind of a perfect place for it. I mean, it has all this fallow land from the days of the plantations. But query whether biofuel has to grow in a kind of plantation and big refinery kind of model, or whether it can grow kind of like wine, like grapes for wine, where you have a lot of farmers out there with relatively small plots, and you tell them how, you show them how, they grow it, and they deliver like the grapes. They deliver the biofuel to you, or the stock to you, and then you refine it, and sort of works on a co-op basis, and that's not the right word, but
Right.
on a centralized basis with a lot of diversified farmers involved, having their own businesses and making their hopefully middle-class lives doing that. So query, is that model in play? I mean, could that happen? Or are we talking about larger installations that would be controlled by fewer people?
We've always hoped for the distributed model. It's with the biofuel crops, especially the type of crops that we would grow for oil. We don't envision that you would be able to have a large plantation and make money just on the biofuel part, and just for growing oil for crops. You're going to need to diversify just to make the farm work. The fact is that until the price of oil, the price of the barrel goes way up and you can make a lot of money by growing oils, you're not going to support your whole farm just by growing oil. Even if you have a few crops or a few byproducts from that crop, it probably is going to work better if your farm can grow several different kinds of crops, rotate the biofuel crops in maybe in the interim between your food crops and your other.
Is that a problem of any kind, to rotate sage athropa? I don't know if that's the right one, but say a biofuel crop with other, strictly food crops. Is there a negative aspect to that rotation?
I'm not a farmer, so I don't want to say for sure, but I don't believe, in most cases, I don't think there is. Actually, I've heard farmers talk about the fact that having a completely different kind of crop can actually help break up the bug cycle, for example.
Yeah,
So
sure.
you've got a cycle of bugs that usually
Sometimes
comes
it's
through.
healthy, yeah.
There's a whole different type of crop that the bugs can't live on for one season, and then that might help your next crop, actually. So there's actually, the agricultural side has a lot of really interesting variables to it, and we're just starting to learn a lot about that. But there's so much to learn that we're going to be learning about it for a while.
Well, it's an interesting possibility because, as you say, if you do biofuel on a distributed basis, You improve diversified agriculture because the farmers are not only doing the biofuel, they're doing other food crops. And so now you have an industry of agriculture coming up. So, people should want to see you succeed in that and be one among many buyers who buy from diversified agriculture.
Yeah, we hope so. We've always envisioned our ideal situation would be for us not to farm anything, but to buy from groups of farmers.
Yeah.
Because our specialty is not in farming.
Yeah.
We've recently had to get into farming because
Couldn't
nobody's
find the
doing
farmers.
it. We have to show them that it can be done.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of expertise out there among the current farmers that we could draw from if we get a lot of people growing different crops. Now there's going to be a limit because some of the biofuel crops, like say canola or some of the field crops, you do need heavy machinery to harvest them. So if you need a combine to harvest it, you probably won't grow 2 acres of it because you can't get the
Economies of
machinery
scale,
there,
yeah,
right? But there could be some options for other types of crops that you could rotate in or even grow around other crops.
Yeah.
And what we've been seeing so far with the mac nut waste is we're getting the mac nuts from the factory, but the factory actually buys from a variety of farms. So we actually, in fact, right now are getting mac nuts from a variety of small farms.
That's the way it should be.
And they are consolidated and we process them there.
To have an industry, you have to have this kind of specialization and centralization of processing. That's why a supply chain manager is so important.
Yeah, and for the oil crushing material or oil crushing facility, you probably only have 1 or 2 on an island because that's pretty specialized and it's pretty expensive. So you're probably not going to have one on every farm. But growing of the crops, we always envision that hopefully it would be more widespread.
Am I right in identifying one of the problems here is that, as I mentioned before, you don't know what your market is. It's not predictable, especially when you're talking to selling to the utility and competing against other offshore sellers. So you can't be sure how much to produce. And if you overproduce, you may not have a market for what you produced. So it's hard to plan. You don't have a national market. Maybe you do have a national market. I don't know.
We haven't exported biodiesel out of Hawaii, except we have sold a little bit to the island of Palmyra, who used it for their power on the island. But yeah, everything else has stayed in Hawaii. We haven't sent anything back to the West Coast. It is a challenge not knowing exactly where we're going to sell it, but on the agricultural side, the main challenge is not so much the volume, because we know the volume of diesel fuel that's used in Hawaii. We know that that's a market we can penetrate. The challenge is just the price. So we can't pay $5 a gallon for the oil if we have to sell the fuel for $4 a gallon. So it's just finding that spot where the price makes it feasible for someone to grow the crops commercially.
Yeah.
So I'd say that more than the market itself. Unless there's the only way the market will help is if you have a market that's willing to pay a high price for the fuel to support the farmers,
I wonder
which
about
has
that.
happened in Oregon.
Just sitting with you now, I just wonder about that because, never a day goes by without some news story about some new renewable installation of, major magnitude somewhere in the world. And I think it's not just Hawaii is in a transformation, everybody is in a transformation. And I was going to say, before I held my tongue, that all the trouble in the Middle East, is likely to raise the price of oil. And maybe that's so in the short term, but in the longer term, if everybody's doing a transformation to renewables, you can't count on that either.
Right.
Have you any thoughts about that, any analysis that goes to how to plan your future?
Yeah, that's one of the big challenges in our industry is we're we're competing against a fuel that is very price volatile. So we don't know next year what the price of oil is going to be.
Yeah, but
Yet we're competing against it.
people used to say, maybe they still do, is that ultimately oil is going to be very expensive. The question is, if oil gets very expensive, do we care if we have renewables, accounting for so much of our supply?
Right.
And it's not clear what's going to happen here or anywhere. Anyway, let's talk about money, okay? If I gave you $100 million in brand new, fresh investment equity capital, would that help you? And what would you do with it?
Would help a bit. Yeah, that's been one of the challenges in this industry is finding the investment. We haven't gotten a lot of investment from the state as far as tax credits or laws or anything like that. So we've done a lot of it privately, found our own investment money to make this work. And it's been a challenge, it's been a struggle, but we keep finding ways. We envision that with a large, it would take some investment, but kind of the next steps for the state as a whole would be to have a biodiesel plant of the type of technology and capacity of the one that we built on the Big Island, have one of those on every other island.
Sure,
we
that's
think that
cheaper than moving it around.
It is cheaper than moving it around. It's also, we would hope it would stimulate the agriculture on that island. So if you have a plant on Maui, then you could start to explore growing crops on Maui to help feed that plant. So
So to do that, you need money.
do need money, yeah. You need investment. The plant we built on the Big Island was not cheap. It was not like the one we built
No,
on
I know,
Maui
it was
that was
very
duct taped
ambitious.
together. It's very, very new technology, and also as our scale gets larger and as we build a real refinery, which is what the one on the Big Island is. There's just a lot that goes along with it as far as safety, controls, just the whole logistics to feed that kind of facility. Everything gets a little bit more expensive. So that's where we find that challenge of wanting to make better fuel at a higher volume, but we do know our cost goes up when we do that. We just have to keep finding the market to sell the fuel and make that map back.
Yeah, I'm thinking of other possible challenges, and I'll ask you if you have any others too, but it strikes me that, energy is fickle in a funny way. It's like the flavor of the moment, and the moment for the past couple of years has been photovoltaic. And you'll say to me, photovoltaic has nothing to do with transportation. And I will say yes, at least right now that's true. But that's what people focus on, and there's nobody telling us, no leadership position here, telling us, wait a minute, you guys, don't forget biofuel. It's got to be part of the array of renewable sources, and it's very important for transportation.
That's one of the big challenges we've faced, especially on a statewide level and coming from the state government, is we haven't seen, we think it's great that there's tax credits and benefits that the state puts in place for wind and solar, but we've been kind of struggling without that. And very recently, this last year, a lot of the federal incentives expired, so that affects us quite a bit. And without a state similar thing in place for the state, that's a big challenge for us. Especially when we're looking at the state's looking at things like LNG, bringing in other, building a lot of infrastructure to bring in other kinds of fuels. We kind of question where the investment might be for biofuel from the state side.
Yeah. So what are you looking for from? I didn't realize, but I guess I did know that you have renewable energy tax credits, but don't apply to biofuel.
Right.
So and if you
and there's actually some biofuel tax credits out there that don't apply to biodiesel. So that's another struggle for the state. There's mandates in place for ethanol that we
you try to
don't
convert
really help
that,
us. Yeah.
but it didn't get converted.
Yeah.
And now we have a tax credit for ethanol, but no ethanol.
Right.
I love it, the way it works.
And no tax credit for biodiesel. So.
Perfect, perfect. But if you wanted to establish this kind of vineyard approach, to use
Right.
my term, and if you wanted to put individual refineries on each island, and you wanted to, bring in some young farmers to sort of tip the scales with them and get them involved in diversified agriculture, then tax credit would be really helpful,
Yeah.
wouldn't it?
Especially to start up the agricultural side, because there's a lot, as I mentioned, there's a lot we're learning, and we can't afford to pay for all of that research and learning. We have to stay in business, so that initial investment in the agricultural side has to come from elsewhere. We just can't afford to do it. So if we are really serious about growing biofuels as a state, that investment has to come in from the state or from the federal government.
Yeah.
There's a lot of equipment that you need to get started that a farmer is not going to be able to buy. They can't buy a combine. They're not going to plant crops experimentally because the farmers can't afford to lose those crops either. So that's where that kickstart really needs to come in.
Yeah, well, yeah, true, and we can't forget this. It's an amnesia thing that we sometimes experience. Everybody hot about biofuel a few years ago, and everybody making rhetorical gestures about how terrific it was, and then amnesia sets in. You got to remind them. But I want to say one thing, and that is that you guys have been trucking, use the expression, for a long time,
We have.
and you were the originators of biofuel in the state, and through thick or thin, you've kept it going, and I believe there's a big future for you. So all you got to do is excuse the expression, you got to keep trucking.
Thanks. We'll keep moving forward.
That's Jenna Long, Supply Chain Manager of Pacific Biodiesel, and the daughter of Bob and Kelly King. Yay!
Yeah.
And you did a great job on this interview, actually, Jenna.
Oh, thank you.
And here we are in Hawaii, the state of energy, talking about, what is it? Well, biofuels in transportation and keeping fossil fuels out of transportation. That's our mission. Anyway, thanks so much, Jenna.
All right. Thank you for having us.
Aloha.